My husband has always told me how significant turning 40 would be for him. His father died when he was only 39, so he had this one special wish to live longer than his father did. As his 40th birthday drew near, I began to consider how special it would be to throw a surprise party, but he showed up, embracing his coworker and calling me a mistake. I will make sure he remembers what he did for as long as I live. I went all out during the planning process because I wanted everything to be perfect, from the guest list to the decorations, and I even sent a special invitation to my mother-in-law Cheryl because we have always been close, and I knew how much it would mean to my husband to have his closest family and friends around him to celebrate the occasion. For him, it felt like the ideal moment to mark the occasion in a big, joyful way. On the night of my husband's birthday party, everything was set up. The decorations were flawless. The guests were quietly waiting. The house was dark, and we all stood silently, our excitement barely contained, as I made sure to book a flight for my mom to arrive because she lives out of town for this occasion. I was also excited to see the look on my husband's face when he walked into a room full of the people who cared about him the most. I had set the scene without giving anything away over breakfast, and I had casually mentioned to him that I would be at my parents' house that evening in an attempt to keep his expectations low. I hoped he would think I wasn't planning anything special for his birthday, and I could only imagine how shocked he would be when he walked through the door and found the real surprise waiting for him. The sounds of his footsteps and the faint jingle of his keys as he struggled to unlock the door made my heart race, and I was practically tingling with anticipation. We all remained motionless, and I laughed to myself as I imagined him trying key after key in the dark, probably muttering to himself in frustration, until the door finally swung open, and we all jumped up at once, shouting surprise, "Happy birthday!" as the lights flickered on. But instead of the happy expression I had been eagerly awaiting, my husband Jackson was standing in the doorway with his tie loose, arms wrapped around his coworker April, in the middle of a kiss. Everyone around us fell silent, and the room that had been so full of happiness moments before was now filled with shock and disbelief as people gasped and stared at Jackson and April. For some background, my husband and April have been co-workers for a long time, and she's younger than the two of us and is one of his subordinates at work. Over the years, I've seen her at the yearly office Christmas parties when Jackson would invite me along. I've paid attention to how she interacts with people, especially with him. At times, she would come off as a little flirtatious and even call herself his work wife in jest, but I had never taken it seriously because she seemed to act that way around almost all of the older men at work, so I assumed this was just her personality, and I never really let her behavior bother me because I trusted my husband and didn't think she posed a serious threat. However, seeing Jackson kiss her in the doorway was heartbreaking in a way I never would have imagined. I felt a rush of emotions when my husband realized that we were all there staring at him. He finally stopped, his eyes unfocused, and he appeared to be intoxicated, stumbling a little. He looked around at the people who had come for his surprise party, and he just said, "Whoops." The room was silent, and all I could feel was the crushing weight of embarrassment and hurt, with everyone watching me to see how I would react. Cheryl, my mother-in-law, was the first to break the silence, standing up and demanding loudly, "Jackson, what are you doing?" Jackson's eyes widened as he did not expect to see his mother here, and he slowly turned his head. April stood beside him, awkwardly fixing her shirt, her lipstick nearly wiped clean from their kiss. Even though I was afraid of what he might say next, Jackson sighed and simply shook his head. He looked around the room before clearing his throat in a casual tone, as if making a statement. He tried to explain to her that in his day, the state didn't expect everyone to be here. He trailed off and looked a little embarrassed. Now my heart was racing as I confronted him directly, asking why he was with April in our house, kissing her when I had planned this surprise party to celebrate his birthday. He said he had intended to reveal the news on a different day. Then, with a sneer, he added that since the surprise party had exposed him in April, he might as well tell the truth. April and I have been seeing each other for a few months now, and he paused to look at her as if to confirm it before turning back to face me. I was completely taken aback by what my husband was saying, and my hands were shaking, and my heart was racing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words felt surreal, as if they were coming from someone other than the man I'd spent years building a life with. He continued to talk about how he had tried to suppress his feelings for April for months, but this year he realized that he needed to finally start living life on his terms. He then went on a tirade about how his father had died young and never had the opportunity to realize his dreams, which he didn't want to end up like. He said in an almost defiant tone, "I need to do what makes me happy before it's too late for me." My mouth dropped open in shock, and I could feel the tears beginning to form in my eyes. In the heat of the moment, Something inside of me broke, and I felt betrayed and furious. I grabbed the birthday cake, the same cake that I had taken the time and care to choose for him, and threw it at his face without thinking, causing it to smash all over. Jackson was understandably upset as he wiped his face and shouted at me, "Look what you've done. You've ruined my shirt." His voice echoed throughout the room, and given the seriousness of the situation, it was almost ironic how trivial his complaint was. At first, everyone just gasped in shock, but then some started laughing at his reaction. Our guests could see how unfair my husband had been to humiliate me in this way, and I guess they wanted to show their support. Jackson stormed off upstairs to likely change while April stood there, unbothered and staring at everyone. As soon as Jackson was out of sight, I took the opportunity to glare at her. Then I marched over to her, grabbed her by the arm, and pushed her outside, her loud protests filling the air. Jackson was more concerned with the condition of his shirt than with the fact that he had just hurt me in front of everyone we knew, openly flaunting his betrayal without sparing me another glance. Cheryl was yelling at April for having the audacity to be with Jackson under my roof at our party in front of our friends, but not a single guest came to her aid or even batted an eye. Once outside, I turned to her and said the words I had been holding in like poison. "I just can't believe you were with my husband after all the times you've seen me at this party, after you've seen us together for so long." Long years of confusion and pain poured out, but April wasn't fazed, wasn't even ashamed. She just scoffed, her lips curling into a smug, defiant smirk, as if I were the one in the wrong. Her voice was full of contempt as she said that Jackson wanted her and that I had no right to stand between them, adding that he was going to leave me someday. But rather than taking accountability, she added, "Perhaps I should consider why he had." Her words, "You don't understand him the way I do. You don't make him smile the way I do. That's why he's leaving you. He deserves someone better than you," made me feel inadequate as a wife, implying that my inability to keep him satisfied was the reason he had turned to her. Every word she said pushed me closer to the edge, and I could hardly comprehend her nerve. Jackson saying those hurtful things to me was one thing, but April throwing them back in my face was a completely different kind of heartbreak. She began to cry, clutching her face where I had slapped her, her cheek now a fiery shade of red from the impact. Through her tears, she shouted a stream of harsh words at me, her voice shrill and shaking with anger, before I could even reply. Cheryl entered with a loud, firm voice and confronted April, saying, "If you don't leave this property right now, you'll be getting a slap from me too." April was furious and stared back, but she dared not approach Cheryl because by this point, the other guests had rushed outside, drawn by the chaos in our front yard. They stood around in stunned silence, some whispering among themselves and others too shocked to even speak. When they arrived at our party, I sensed that their critical gazes were shifting between April and me. Then, as if on cue, Jackson reappeared, walking out with a freshly changed shirt and looking uncomfortably calm considering everything that had just transpired. A bag was slung over his shoulder, and it took me a moment to realize that he had packed a few of his belongings. When he noticed April clutching her cheek and tears streaming down her face, he hurried to her side, putting his arm around her protectively as though she were the one hurt in all this. "What is wrong with you?" He yelled at me, his voice full of anger and disappointment. He looked at me as though I had crossed the line, making me the villain for reacting to the woman who had been with him. Then he said words that broke my heart again. "I can't deal with this any longer. I'm done." The house after our trip, which I hope I never see again, because he was leaving me, ending our marriage, and already planning a weekend getaway with her. I stood there, frozen in shock and heartbreak, watching as he led April to his car, and then they both drove off without a second thought. I felt a deep, aching emptiness as I watched his car's taillights disappear down the street, and Cheryl looked just as devastated as I did. Everyone had just witnessed my marriage ending in real time, and I was so embarrassed. Thank goodness Cheryl took charge right away. She graciously asked everyone to leave, thanked them for coming, and apologized for what had happened. Some people approached me to give me awkward hugs and offer me some consolation before leaving, but I was still feeling completely numb and was still processing what had happened. Cheryl then led me to the kitchen. The shock, humiliation, and sheer disbelief at what had just transpired. My husband had ended our marriage at his surprise birthday party in front of his friends and family, came out when she handed me a glass of water, and even though my hands were shaking, I hardly noticed until I realized it was just her and me. I had held back my tears for too long, not wanting to cry in front of everyone, But now that I was alone with her, they all came out. I told Cheryl that I was emotionally and physically lost and didn't know where to go, what to do, or how to start over. I had dedicated so many years to this marriage, taking care of my husband during his illnesses, cooking, cleaning, and even giving up my career because he always wanted me to be a stay-at-home wife. And now he had torn it out from under me and was leaving me with nothing. Imagine packing up my life and leaving the house we had shared for years. Cheryl shook her head firmly at this, and then she reminded me of something I had forgotten. The house Jackson and I had lived in wasn't ours. Rather, it belonged to Cheryl's late husband. It was a house full of memories that she had treasured, and after his death, she graciously let Jackson and me move in so that we could start a family and begin a new life together. At the time, it felt like a gift of a new beginning for us in a place of love and support. But now everything had fallen apart, and the weight of what Jackson had done was more than just a betrayal. It was a breach of the very trust Cheryl had placed in us following what my son did to you. I'm ashamed to have raised someone who could do this, she told me, her voice heavy with the kind of grief that only a mother could feel when she realized her child had changed into someone she hardly recognized. She put her arms around me in an embrace, then looked me square in the eyes and said, "This is my house, and I decide who lives here, and I'm choosing you." Her words were a lifeline, giving me control over a situation that felt completely out of my control. She went on to say that she wasn't going to let Jackson and April get away with what they had done, that she wanted to teach Jackson a lesson to show him that his actions had real, painful consequences. He needed to be reminded that ruining a marriage and walking away without accountability was not an option. Then, in the middle of all the chaos, she added something that made me smile. "There's no way I'm letting April move in here with my son. She's not ruining my family home." Cheryl's protectiveness toward me surprised me because I had assumed she would eventually support her son. But instead, she was watching out for me. Jackson may have believed he was in control, but Cheryl and I were going to show him that life wouldn't be that simple. I must admit that hearing Cheryl's words made me feel relieved and like a weight had been lifted, knowing that I wouldn't be kicked out of the house I had called home. Cheryl's support gave me the strength I needed to take charge of the situation, and over the weekend, I signed a formal rental agreement with her, formalizing everything I wanted. The agreement was in place, and I knew I had solid ground to stand on. That same weekend, I carefully packed up everything Jackson owned. It was strangely therapeutic to box up the remnants of our shared life, and I piled them neatly on the porch outside so he could easily retrieve them when he returned from his trip. It wasn't until a week later that I finally noticed his car pull into the driveway. I had already made all the necessary preparations, including installing security cameras outside the house, because I knew what was going to happen and needed them for my protection in case things went wrong. I had also changed the locks because I couldn't let him come in here and turn my life upside down again. Sure enough, when he tried to open the door with his key, nothing happened. He fumbled with the lock for a moment before realizing he was locked out, and his face twisted in frustration. Eventually, he started. I watched him on camera, feeling strangely calm. But I wasn't about to let him back in after everything that had happened. So instead of opening the door, I spoke to him over the intercom, sounding almost bored. "What are you doing here, Jackson?" I asked, sounding almost bored. His response was immediate and furious, and he started yelling, accusing me. His voice was filled with contempt as he raged about how tired he was of me and how he couldn't stand my so-called neediness and desperation anymore by continuing to stay here when he had ended our marriage in front of everyone. He claimed he didn't want to deal with me at all, and that he had given me plenty of time already to pack my things and leave, insisting that I should have left by now. His eyes then fell on the boxes packed outside, and he fell silent. I suppose he didn't realize earlier that those were his belongings outside. He glared at the boxes and then shook his head at the door, as though it were all a ridiculous joke. But it wasn't, and he knew it. "You think you can throw out my belongings like this, and you think you're going to get away with it." He stomped up to the door once more, banging on it and slamming his fist against the wood. "You have no right to do this, and I'll take you to court if I have to." It was almost ironic how he still believed he was in control of the situation. I leaned closer to the intercom and spoke calmly as I explained that this was his mom's house, not his, and that I had signed a rental agreement with Cheryl, making the house legally acceptable for me to live in now, and pointed out that he was the one trespassing. After a little pause to allow him to process what I had said, I went on to say that he was welcome to try to take the matter to court, but I didn't think he would have much of a case. I insisted that he take his belongings and leave right away, or I would call the police. As I watched Jackson on camera, his bewilderment was evident on his face, as if he was having trouble understanding what was going on. The way he stood there, frozen for a moment, was almost pitiful, but as soon as the confusion appeared, frustration replaced it. He screamed at the door, and then in a rush of movement, he pulled out his phone. I was sure he was calling his mother, hoping she would intervene and defend him and reverse the situation. But I knew Cheryl had no intention of doing that. I was sure she would tell him exactly what I had. This was no longer his house, and he had to face the consequences of his actions. I could hear him shouting insults at the door, his voice echoing over the intercom as he called me a thief, accusing me of stealing his house, and I noticed that he was pacing wildly on the porch, kicking over boxes and muttering angrily under his breath. It was obvious that whatever conversation he was having with Cheryl wasn't going well for him. I could have responded to his insults, but I didn't see the point. He kept saying, "I'm going to make you pay for this." He could try to take this to court if he wanted, but we both knew he had nothing to stand on because I had done everything according to the book, and he couldn't claim I had wronged him when he had broken our marriage vows and betrayed me in the worst way possible. After what seemed like an hour of him ranting outside, the fight finally drained out of him. His shoulders slumped as the realization that there was no way to win this set in, and with no other option, Jackson started to move his boxes into his car. I watched as he stuffed the last of his belongings into the trunk, slammed it shut, and drove off. Ever since that day, I've received numerous voicemails from both Jackson and April, each one more bitter than the last, with April in particular seeming to enjoy calling me names. The reason Jackson isn't living with April right now is that she shares a place with 2 other roommates, and their landlord is strict about the rules. I am a villain for managing to have Jackson removed from the house. She keeps talking about how they both wanted to start over in this house and that I had stolen that dream from them. Jackson has been living in a motel, and based on their messages, he is miserable. Now that it's no longer my problem, I'm focused on making sure Jackson is held accountable for what he did in multiple ways. I've already filed for divorce, and I'm willing to fight to make sure he pays the appropriate alimony he may owe. She isn't allowed to let Jackson move in, which is honestly a little amusing. If they're really that committed to each other, then I think April should break her rental agreement and find a place where they can start their new chapter. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and after considering all of your advice, I finally sent an email to Jackson's company regarding his ongoing affair with April. I knew that actions have consequences, especially when you betray someone who has been nothing but loyal to you. He wants a life with April, which is fine, but he's going to help me rebuild the life he damaged, whether he likes it or not. I explained in my email everything Jackson had admitted to me about their affair, pointing out that it had been going on for months. I'd also detailed specific incidents I had seen, such as April's overly friendly behavior with older men at various office parties. I felt that sharing our matters wouldn't undo the betrayal he had inflicted on me, but I felt it was necessary for the benefit of his other subordinates. I wanted to paint a clear picture of their relationship, not just as a personal one. I hadn't expected the company to take my email seriously, but after a week of silence, I began hearing from some of Jackson's coworkers who had also become my friends over the years that the HR department had started a thorough investigation into the matter. It seemed that word had gotten out about his favoritism towards April over other employees and that he had been giving her preferential treatment for a long time, which had always sparked complaints in the workplace. So my thorough explanation and the concerns of other staff members compelled the business to look into Jackson's affair. It was no longer a private matter. It had entered professional territory, and that was when everything changed. Days later, I found out from my friends that Jackson had been let go as a result of the investigation, and I couldn't contain my relief at the idea of him losing the privileges he had taken for granted while engaging in this affair. As for April, I'm not sure if she will face the same consequences. Rumor has it that HR is still investigating her involvement in the matter, but I haven't heard any solid information. While I hope she is held accountable as well, I also understand that it is ultimately out of my control. For anyone concerned about my alimony situation and whether I would be entitled to anything once Jackson got fired, rest assured that I'm in a good place. Jackson has earned a sizable salary over the years, but I've realized that he rarely spends any of it on us. We never took vacations, had few date nights, and he rarely bought me anything. Looking back, it's obvious that the warning signs were always there, but I didn't want to see them. In any case, my entire focus is on getting the divorce finalized, and I'm determined to make sure I get what I deserve because I've been through too much to accept anything less than what is fair. Given Jackson's loss of his job and everything else that's happened, I feel like I'm ready to move on. Update 3. I've been divorced from my ex for a while now and have started dating again. Jackson was upset with me during the divorce proceedings because I allegedly cost him his job, but there was nothing he could do about it. Several witnesses saw him kiss April during a surprise party, and he had admitted to the affair. The first thing I did after my divorce was go on a solo vacation by myself and lounge on the beach all day, sipping cocktails. I am currently working part-time at my friend's boutique and intend to apply for full-time jobs in the future. I didn't receive a huge settlement during the alimony negotiations, but I did receive more than enough to start rebuilding my life. Cheryl and I have remained in each other's lives. She has been a rock for me during this ordeal, and her understanding and kindness have given me the space I need to heal. As for Jackson and April, they are still dating, and it seems that April was never let go from the company. But I've heard that her coworkers no longer trust her. Most of them seem to have cut off contact with her because they don't want to be associated with someone who has been at the center of such a large company scandal.